Hi there and welcome to Lorena's Labyrinth. I'm Anna Pirelli. This video is the third part in the series of the anatomy of psychological distress. Now, if you haven't watched part 1 and 2, I do recommend that you do so. More specifically, part 2, which is a simplified, if you like, and dumbed down, which is not a nice word, version of neuroscience that I have found to be a fairly simple way of educating my clients in the past, and which has proved to be very beneficial for them on the pathway to recovery. In this video, we're going to be talking about primarily the brain chemicals that help us to function well and oversee our mood fluctuations and hopefully build stability. But without further ado, moving on to the next slide. So, before I start talking about the brain chemistry and melatonin in particular, this is one of the reasons why, if people attend the doctors saying that they are experiencing symptoms of illness such as depression and anxiety, the first thing you should be asking your doctor to do is actually run some blood tests and check certain things, because basically the body is just one great big beaker of chemicals and vitamins and solutions and all the rest of it. And if these chemicals are out of balance, then it has flow on effects to other parts of the body's chemistry, which of course is vital to neurofunction, how our brain works. So, that being said, let's take a look at melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that is produced by the brain in the pineal gland. Now, I just want to state here that I am not an expert. Just a reminder here, you must do your own research. If you find a subject that I talk about interesting, there's every possibility that I may not have this story 100% because I am not a neuroscientist and I'm not a GP. This is just based on my understandings. And even though I've done research before I do these videos to refresh and make myself current on what's happening, science still changes all the time. So this is entire video is based on my understandings. Please do your own research. Anyway, okay, so back to melatonin. Its role is to basically work in with the timing of your circadian rhythm, and that's your 24-hour clock and your sleeping. Now, people that do shift work, they can find their circadian rhythm negatively interrupted. And this includes for people in places in the northern hemisphere. I can't speak. In the northern hemisphere, who can experience long periods of daylight or long periods of darkness throughout their days. So their internal clock can be disrupted and their body may not be able to produce enough melatonin and they might need a supplement. Now, melatonin does not act as a sedative. Instead, people that do shift work, for example, if they take melatonin supplements before bedtime, they go to sleep more easily. Instead of tossing and turning and looking at the walls, they tend to go off to sleep. Now, the studies on melatonin reflect that it can be very helpful. It's got other benefits as well for the detoxification of the body. I think it's the production of free radicals and antioxidants as well. It also has benefits for the formation of the bones and to protect the bones. It apparently benefits your heart system, the cardiovascular, and your immune system, and it regulates your body mass as well, apparently. So it's a very interesting and probably understated chemical in the body, if we like. But anyway, it's also used to treat conditions such as depression, chronic pain, dementia, and people that experience jet lag or preoperative anxiety, migraine, or recovering from a traumatic brain injury. They might actually be prescribed by their doctor melatonin supplements. Um, and what was the other one? Oh, some studies do show that there might be side effects with taking melatonin supplements. That's really important to know. So there seems to be a professional divide about supplements, and this is another reason why, even if you can buy it over the counter, make sure you have a chat with your doctor about what you're doing. For most of us, if we've got an adequate diet with plenty of protein in it, our body can actually manufacture enough melatonin for our body needs. Obviously, there are some people that can't eat protein. I have a granddaughter with PKU, so she's got very restricted intake of protein as part of her diet. But for the rest of us, unless we're a vegetarian, obviously you're going to have to accommodate the protein in different ways. Animal products are the best source of melatonin. And you can ensure that you keep your levels up by including the following diet options: tart cherries, apparently not necessarily the cherry juice. A lot of people will be tempted to do the cherry juice, but apparently that's not recommended. Goji berries are another good source of protein, along with chicken, turkey, eggs, milk, fish, and nuts. Now, the other recommendation to help keep your melatonin levels heavy or high is to try and reduce your exposure to artificial light and instead increase your exposure to sunlight. Now, if you're living in places like Australia, of course, being out in full sunlight is definitely not advised because of the skin cancer risk. So, for us Australians and people in a climate like Australia, you may want to remember to be in filtered sunlight and pay attention to the time of the day that you actually expose yourself to the sun and have your skin exposure. So, as said before, some people can purchase melatonin supplements. We can get them in Australia over the counter without a prescription. However, as stated before, definitely I believe it's important, and the professional advice is it's important to make sure that your doctor is aware, because it can actually negatively interact with some other prescriptive medications and health issues, such as diabetes, blood disorders, and immunodisorders. Now, from what I saw as well, the studies around prolonged use are in the early days, so there's no conclusive information about this. So, going back to it, definitely pay attention to your melatonin levels, have a chat with your doctor, and make sure he's aware of what you're doing if you take supplements. Otherwise, try and adjust your diet to accommodate. So I'm not going to try and pronounce this word because I'm not even going to make a fool of myself with it. I'm just going to call it GABA. Now, GABA is a neurotransmitter and it's a chemical messenger situated in your brain. It is said to slow down your brain by blocking specific signals, if I can talk, in your central nervous system. That is your brain and your spinal cord. Now, scientists also call GABA, and this is a mouthful, a non-protein amino acid neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters we talk about in part 2, so this is what would have been helpful if you've seen that one before. But anyway, going back to GABA specifically, it's known to produce a calming effect on the body, and it's thought to play a major role in controlling what is called hyperactivity of the nerve cells that are associated with anxiety, stress, and fear, and those that would interrupt quality of sleep. Now, it's believed that GABA activity, it's still in the early ages of research, if I can pronounce, um, not conclusive is my understanding as well, but GABA activity may contribute to anxiety and mood disorders, such as depression. It's also apparently said to have potential links with schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder, which makes you think, well, what, intellectual ones as well? Quite possibly. And it's also, at least in the early stages, linked towards epilepsy and seizures. Now, the important thing about GABA is that it is reliant on vitamin B6 to manufacture. So, to have good levels of GABA, we need to make sure that we've got vitamin B6. If we've got vitamin B6 deficiencies, then there's every possibility that we're going to experience some of the negative medical conditions or experiences. But anyway, I've lost my train of thought there. I wasn't clear there. Okay, so to reiterate, GABA needs vitamin B6 to be able to manufacture it. And if GABA is low, GABA can become low if there are underlying medical conditions that block the body's capacity to process vitamin B. And this can be renal and immune disorders and substance use. And it doesn't necessarily have to be substance abusers. This can be when a person's body or their biology is unable to tolerate alcohol, just for example. People recovering from addiction are often provided with vitamin B supplements, and this will be all part of promoting healthy GABA levels. So, there are medications to treat conditions such as lung, heart, and anti seizure medication that can also interfere with the body's capacity to process vitamin B. Now, I'm talking about vitamin B, of course, because without vitamin B, or the vitamin B6, our body can't produce GABA, which GABA is the important thing. Antibiotics also can interfere with vitamin B6. What is the word? Metabolization. Um, but those antibiotics to treat tuberculosis, they're the ones that are said to interfere with the body chemistry and which can create deficiencies of GABA. So hopefully I've made that clear. Moving on to the next slide. So, of course, the scientists have got a fancy name for what is called the body's capacity to block the manufacture of GABA, and it's called a pyridoxine deficiency, I believe. All right. So, anyway, that's the whole metabolization of vitamin B. So, going back to this, you will be able to identify where there is a risk that you may be low in GABA. And that is because your mood and cognitive function become impaired. People that have got vitamin B deficiencies, they tend to be observable with things such as skin disorders like dermatitis. If people have got gum disease, such as scaling of the gums, they also may have a vitamin B deficiency. People with poor immune or lowered immune responses can also be deficient in vitamin B. Other ones, interestingly, is anemia, and dependent on the conditions, a person may need more than the daily intake of vitamin B. So, once again, this is a case of go to the doctor and have your vitamin B levels assessed, because you might be taking the recommended daily dose of vitamin B, but because you've got underlying conditions, your body is not processing it. You need to take more so that your body can manufacture the required GABA levels. Moving on to the next slide. For most of us, though, if we retain a healthy diet and make sure that we take or that we include certain foods, this can help to promote our levels of vitamin B and ensure that we have the correct amount of GABA going through our body, if you like, which is required to actually create other um, essential hormones or whatever in our body. So, my information when I was doing my research was that you can buy GABA supplements. If your diet is inadequate, you can buy them, but it's actually stated that um, they're not reliable. Current research is that they're not particularly effective because they don't necessarily cross I think it's called the blood-bone barrier, and apparently this is what's really important for GABA manufacture. So what they do recommend is that people with low doses of GABA and vitamin B eat certain items such as kimchi, miso, tempeh, oolong, green or black tea. Um, if you can't get enough vitamin B in your diet, of course, take vitamin B supplements. Now, other foods that boost the production of GABA include brown rice, soy, adzuki beans, which I've never had or seen, chestnuts, which we just don't get in Australia really, mushrooms, tomatoes, spinach, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, sprouted grains, and sweet potatoes. These are all apparently high in vitamin B6. Um, Now, a point to consider for those of you that weren't aware is that as we age, apparently our body is said to be less efficient in processing the essential vitamins, including the B groups. And this is why a lot of us at a certain age will be targeted with vitamin supplements, including vitamin B. And they are actually essential to improve our cognitive function. And for younger women, if they suffer from PMS, vitamin Bs and this kind of diet will be helpful for them. Now, the next chemical on the list is dopamine. Now, most people have probably heard of this one. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which basically means that it sends messages from the brain to other parts of the body. It is also associated with the pleasure, reward, and motion. Now, without going too far down the rabbit warren, let's just say that when your dopamine levels are healthy, you feel vital, healthy, energetic, happy to be alive, all right? People with low dopamine levels will often seek to create the feeling of vitality with a false high from addictive substances. However, it's really important for people to understand if they've been using substances to produce this false high, once they introduce a substance, even if it's the chemical, the body will produce less dopamine naturally. So when they stop taking their introduced chemical, shall we say. Now, this could be with prescriptive medication as well. When you stop taking those, the body then has to kind of kickstart itself into manufacturing dopamine again. And this is why doctors will say, do not stop your medication um, cold turkey, wean yourself off it and do it under a doctor's guidance. And that's all part of managing the symptoms of the withdrawal and that whole body's rebalancing, if you like, because when they stop taking the introduced substance and their body's in that rebuilding stage, they can sink into quite a severe mood imbalance. So the other interesting factor about dopamine is apparently it has been used effectively with Parkinson's disorder as part of managing tremors. I may have that incorrect. Do your research. Um, Now, if a person is deficient in dopamine, as we've sort of briefly touched on, but I've got the images here, a person will struggle to feel joy, or they may do. They can lack motivation, are often fatigued. They experience the mood imbalances. They may be on this emotional roller coaster and they may sink into depression. And obviously, the depth of depression will vary from person to person. Now, if you've been feeling the symptoms described, um, then it would be good to explore whether or not this is caused by the physiological issues that we're talking about or behaviors. I mean, if you're drinking a lot or taking substances, then maybe this is depleting your dopamine levels. Another thing that will impact on your dopamine levels is whether or not you're having too much caffeine. Interesting. That could be Coca Cola, or it could be a cup of coffee, or way too many cups of tea. Now, potential causes of low dopamine, as said, can include excessive amounts of caffeine being consumed in the diet, but other things such as certain drugs, sugar, if a person's got sugar issues and problems processing insulin, that can also interfere with dopamine levels. Stress will definitely deplete your dopamine, as will cortisol, which is a product from your adrenal systems, which goes into overdrive when you're stressed. So if you become stressed, cortisol levels kick up, dopamine goes down. Now, if you've got low stomach acid, your body will not be able to process protein adequately. So your body will experience a reduced capacity to create the dopamine required for good health. So this is that interaction that I'm talking about. Now, just another little bit of potentially useless information. Well, in fact, actually, probably useful. It's been identified that some dopamine replacement medications will reduce the body's natural ability to produce dopamine. I think we touched on that in the previous slide. That's that business of having antidepressants or anti anxiety medication. So, really, anything that we do like this, we need to make sure it's monitored by the appropriate, properly trained people. That's your GP. Um, I would always encourage people to make sure that if they're going to introduce or take themselves off any forms of substances, whether it's prescriptive or over the counter, that yes, it's done under the direction and guidance of their doctor. We talked in the previous slide about the interference with processing, or the body's processing with stomach acids, but we didn't talk about the fact that as we mature and age, of course, the older we get, the less stomach acid we have. And so this will definitely interfere with our body's capacity to process the essential vitamins that we need to create dopamine. Now, one of the pieces of advice that I found doing my research was that to accommodate this, they recommend that you just add cider vinegar to your diet. The aim is to have your body produce enough dopamine naturally to maintain your motivation and energy and that vitality and pleasure with life. Now, other strategies for increasing dopamine and feeding that physiological need for pleasure and reward can be to give yourself a treat, such as a soak in the tub. In my experience, retail therapy can work, but it's addictive and it's easy to blow out the budget, tempting as it might be. I recently did so. It's definitely not the preferred option, so have a chat with your doctor. Now, I've got a couple of vitamin supplements that I saw there that are recommended to help increase your dopamine levels. Vitamin D is obviously associated with exposure to the sun. As said, you've got to do that with caution here in Australia. You've once again got your vitamin B6 referred to, and vitamin B5 apparently plays a part in the production of dopamine, as does exercise and activity. That will increase your dopamine levels as well. But these supplements here, and I have just written the names because I actually can't pronounce those, they would be worth, even I might have a chat with my doctor about what the heck these mean because they're new to me. I don't know enough about them. You might be interested in doing your research on them. So, serotonin is hardly new for most people these days. It's known as the mood stabilizer, and it also is a neurotransmitter, and it's concerted from, I'm going to try and pronounce these words, the essential amino acid L-tryptophan. Now, serotonin plays a key role in body functions such as mood, sleep, digestion. If people experience symptoms of nausea, if they've had wounds that are healing, it supports that. It supports bone health, blood clotting, and sexual desire, and even people's bowel movements. Now, serotonin is different to dopamine in that it's produced in the gut. It stabilizes the mood, and medications target the symptoms of depression, and they help to regulate sleep and wakefulness. Apparently, dopamine is produced mainly in a person's brain, and it affects a person's motivation and pleasure. So, medications for depression do not target dopamine production, they help a person to feel more alert. So, you might be low in serotonin if you struggle to get to sleep or if you've got poor quality of sleep. Other impacts of low serotonin is a lowered libido, uh, poor bowel function once again, and nausea, and when your wounds and cuts are slow to heal. Now, the more overt symptoms of depression can include anxiety and depressive disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, post traumatic stress disorder, also called PTSD, so the trauma injuries, panic disorders, schizophrenia, and phobias. And in the worst case, it can lead to, low serotonin can lead to the S word that we don't want to say because of YouTube censorship. But what it means, or what we're referring to, is a completion which is irreversible. And obviously, that we want to avoid. So, the take home messages about serotonin is that our body doesn't produce L-tryptophan naturally, so we have to include it in our diet. And the amino acid is found in tryptophan without the L. I'm not sure what the difference is, to be honest. But the tryptophans are found in high protein foods such as eggs, fish, cheese, poultry, seeds, and meat. So if you are diagnosed with depression or that you have depression symptoms, you might also want to have a chat with your doctor about whether or not you need to be taking L-tryptophan supplements, especially if you've got dietary restrictions, such as the PKU. Now, the other thing that you might want to try as well, apparently according to recommendations, is adding a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar to your water daily and doing some exercise. That's apparently all said to help build serotonin levels. Oxytocin is a really interesting one. It's referred to as the love hormone, and it's complex. There are many different views on whether or not people can experience a lack of oxytocin as a level, or where you can measure it um, with a barometer or whatever. What is known is that in certain circumstances, the levels of oxytocin will produce a rush of pleasure or love. It's produced in the hypothalamus by the pituitary gland, and it is released when neurons become excited, which is very interesting. There are only a couple of ways that you can have an oxytocin rush, and it's generally about tactile and loving touch or romantic intimacy. The mother infant love bond also produces an oxytocin rush. So when people are able to feel love, they feel less anxious and their relationships become improved because there is less stress and anxiety. Very interesting. People who feel loved tend to demonstrate more loving behaviors, and they feel more lovely. Well, they probably do feel more lovely actually, and more lovable, and they tend to be able to exhibit trust more easily. So oxytocin is linked to an overall psychological stability. This is really interesting. Let's have a little bit more of a look at it. So I guess what I find most interesting about oxytocin is that it's directly related to the environment that people find themselves in, where it impacts on feelings. So when people are feeling unloved or unlovable or living in unhealthy relationships, their oxytocin levels can become depleted. So the research that's been conducted, in my understanding, has shown links between a person with low levels of oxytocin when they're in toxic relationships or if they have a history of abuse and trauma, either as an adult or as a child. Now, these feelings of unlovability or a lack of worth can be compounded when the person is either socially isolated or excluded, or where there is a negative family environment and family breakdown, or what is referred to as fragmentation of the family unit. This could be a person that's estranged, say, from siblings, children, parents, or whatever, because they lack those supports. Now, people with depleted oxytocin levels will often seek to generate the warm, fuzzy rush that you get from oxytocin through impulsive and reckless sexual liaisons. Of course, this isn't everybody, and if they choose this pathway, that will tend to compound the problems where they end up going through a revolving door of relationships with people that don't value them. And it compounds their feelings of betrayal and mistrust. And they don't have an opportunity to learn the skills of having a healthy and committed, intimate partner relationship. And this is usually what they're seeking when they're out there looking for the oxytocin rush. Even if the relationship is purely one of monogamy and commitment where they live at separate houses. I mean, it's not one size fits all, okay? So I'm not trying to make assumptions about any of this. I'm just saying this is what I have observed, and it's not the same for everybody. What I have observed as well is that with this reckless, I'll call it reckless intimacy, it's where sitting at home, what am I going to do? I feel unloved and unlovable. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump on a website and Plenty of Fish or something like that, one of those ones, and find somebody to catch up with and fulfill this need for tactile intimacy. Anyway, they end up consequently feeling um, more isolated after the fact, and quite often will struggle with the low self-esteem because they didn't get that value, care and regard that they're actually seeking, which is the love, love and care, personal and reciprocal connection. And this is all vital to building healthy relationships. So this is potential causes of oxytocin depletion. So, fortunately, there's a number of treatment recommendations for people who are experiencing depleted oxytocin. And one of them, it really sounds very simple, is Googling images of kittens and puppies and babies and animals, all the funny, cute stuff, because they are said to actually have a trigger factor, an internal one where they trigger just by looking at these things. The body to produce oxytocin, which gives that warm rush, and that can be a good short-term solution to feelings of being unloved, because they create that warm fuzzy, as said. Now, another way of addressing the tactile stuff is to have a massage. It's a form of self-care and it involves touch, and it does help to improve mood and connection. There's evidence to support that. There's also evidence to support, that animals provide that warm fuzzy as well. Anybody who's ever had a pet knows that this is the case, and this is why pet therapy is recommended, because, patting of the animals and that physical contact, that will actually create an oxytocin rush as well. Now, if you can't get to a massage, or if you're not comfortable with somebody else giving you a massage, a self hug done properly can actually create a physiological chain of events that will also um, create an oxytocin rush, right? And when we do it properly, if you look at this image here of the girl in the pink top, she's actually not doing it properly as far as the self hug goes. The hand where she's holding the the corner of the square, if you like, of her shoulder, that actually should be up and placed beside her neck and resting on top of the shoulder with the fingers going to the back. Now, if you put your hand up and you have a little bit of a feel, you'll feel that there's a muscular indentation there. So that hand would go up and press on those muscles there, and at the same time, you would put your other hand under your armpit, and I'm doing this as I'm talking this, trying to feel it and explain it to you. Okay, so one hand goes under the armpit, kind of put in a way where it's resting almost on the side of your chest or breast, and your fingers are going around to the back, and you should be able to give a squeeze. So when you're doing a self hug, you put your arms in this position and you squeeze those fingertips down, and that creates a sensation because there's actually trigger points as well there where they can increase the oxytocin as well. So this is what you can do in the absence of a tactile response with other people. So moving on, what else is there? Meditation is another really good way to connect and to feel love, especially if you're doing a spiritual meditation. You could do a heart chakra one. Now, they're very effective as well. A longer term option is therapy to raise your self awareness and identify your own values. This should help to have the flow on effects of raising your self esteem and identifying what and where you are willing to compromise on and negotiate with in regard to having healthy and respectful relationships. So, and just a reminder that healthy and respectful relationships, they're ones where there is um, a reciprocity, basically a mutual regard, and where both parties feel heard and understood. Now, within therapy, this can include learning strategy and technique, as well as knowing your own limitations and how to put boundaries on unhealthy relationships in loving ways. And in the worst case scenarios, it can include strategy on how to end toxic relationships in the best possible ways. And a lot of this is reliant on how we communicate verbally and non-verbally. Now, in regard to supplements, so we've talked about non-chemical introductions. There appears to be a divide between professionals about whether or not there are benefits in treating people with depression through prescribing oxytocin. And in Australia, I did a bit of research. It appears that people can only purchase synthetic oxytocin after visiting their doctor and getting a prescription. So you might find if you introduce some of these other recommendations and focus on overall health, including dietary health, that you don't need a prescription anyway. But it would be remiss of me to not mention that there are some conditions apparently where a person's biology can struggle to naturally produce oxytocin. And there are some links apparently between low levels of oxytocin and some intellectual disabilities, which I found interesting as well. Um, Now, the other reason why, if you can access oxytocin over the counter where you live, um, definitely include your GP in it. That would be my suggestion, because apparently there are if I can say the word, contraindications if your oxytocin goes too high. Once again, I am not an expert. If you have any more information on this particular content, I'm sure all of us would be really interested in hearing what you've got to say. So please do leave a comment. So I'm going to ramp up the speed. We're almost getting to the end of the time. I wanted to complete this video within half an hour today. But in brief, endorphins are referred to as nature's painkillers, and they are both a neurotransmitter and a hormone, and they act upon the pain receptors of a person's brain. So if your body feels pain, such as a wound or even an emotional wound, it will give a rush of endorphin. So apparently they also work by assisting to reduce stress, they improve the mood, and they're associated with activity. So if you're physically active, you're going to get a surge of endorphins. They can also help with appetite regulation and weight loss, And they're also released during childbirth, which is no great surprise, seeing as, that's one of the most painful experiences a person can go through, as far as I'm concerned. Other interesting points are that healthy levels are associated with a healthy self image. And potentially, this is because if you've got healthy endorphin levels, then you're probably exercising, feeling motivated, and not carrying excess weight. Just a thought, I'm being a bit cynical there. My understanding is that there is currently no known cause for why a person might be deficient in endorphins, but they are believed to be the most important chemical released by your body to help you to relieve pain and to reduce stress. So they're vital. They're totally different to the chemicals dopamine and serotonin, and they're also associated with addiction because some people can be addicted to the rush that they get from exercise. There's also another form of addiction they can have. I'm not sure if I'll touch on it here. So, symptoms of a deficiency can include depression, anxiety, body aches and pains, addiction, sleep issues, and impulsive actions. Um, I'm just going to think about how I'm going to convey this for YouTube. It's important to be aware, I think, if we're dealing with somebody with really significant mental health issues, um, that include injuries to self, deliberate, that can be part of their addiction to the endorphin rush. I hope I don't need to go into this. Please, in this particular instance, don't write your comments up there because it can be really quite graphic and concerning to people that haven't worked in the field. But I think it's important, I guess, for this kind of video to touch on that because it's very difficult for family members to actually have to um, provide support sometimes in these instances. But there is an underlying physiological problem going on there when they do that stuff. And so for support workers, it's a real task and a challenge to try and redirect the way they get that endorphin rush from the unhealthy behaviours into the positive behaviours. Moving on to the next slide. So, while it's tempting to replace endorphins with pain killing substances when we're experiencing pain, including emotional pain, I'm a very strong advocate for following your own gut instinct and ensuring that the use of any substances are moderated by your doctor, including your GP. Now, in most instances, people can raise their levels of endorphins without the use of medication. My understanding is, and your feedback is most welcome, as previously stated again and again, when we introduce the painkillers, our body can become dependent on them, both prescription and non prescription. And the more we take, the less our body will produce itself. And once again, just a reminder, this is why when we stop taking an introduced substance, we have to graduate it and we have to do it under medical supervision. And this allows us to put in place the emotional supports around a person while they're doing the withdrawals, if you like, because at least there can be an early intervention if the mood fluctuations start to spiral out of control. And this is really, really important if people have got personality and behavioural disorders or if they're recovering from addiction um, to the heavy duty substances, shall we say, like the opiates and that kind of thing. So, different ways of increasing the amount of endorphins in your body includes having sex. That's right up there at the top. And it's not always an option for people. So, other ways include exercise such as power walking. There's a whole heap of them. Dancing, swimming, going for a hike. I like sitting outdoors rather than going for a hike. Acupuncture is also a recommended treatment. Massage, eating, comfort eating, just in general, apparently will increase endorphins. But of course, all things in moderation. Eating dark chocolate is also very good for increasing the endorphins. I know of a couple of people that would just make sure they had a couple of small pieces there. If it's Lent for me, I'd probably snavel the whole pack and not be able to stop if I was feeling really miserable. Other methods are to watch a comedy or a comforting movie or show, not a drama if you're feeling low. Just watch something that's fun. This is because they all have these behaviors, they all create a physiological response. Okay, so it's not just a case of, oh, take your mind off your problems. These are proven to have physiological impacts on mood, which is brilliant. So, aromatherapy might also benefit you. Listening to uplifting mood music or doing some art. Laughter therapy is brilliant, and I'm going to devote a complete section to that on the next part, part four, because you can Google it in between times if you like. And longer term options can include volunteering at a not for profit, doing a little bit of work, because there's that pleasure and reward association there as well, which goes a bit towards dopamine, but it still raises endorphins, which is brilliant. So, moving on. So, as far as the primary or the major brain chemicals go, we've just covered as many as I believe to be really important or that I know of. So, we're going to summarize here. Hopefully, I've given you lots to think about. That mood is not just about what we think or feel or whatever, it's symptomatic of underlying conditions. And behavior is a manifestation of both our moods and our thoughts. In regard to endorphins, the best thing that I can give, or the best advice I can give to anyone, um, is that no one can do this particular subject justice like Amanda Gore can. I recommend that you visit the link that I've put on the screen here, and I'll put a clickable link in the description. She explains why and how the body works together. In fact, the video, just so you know, is a very old video, and she also has other videos on neuroscience. When they say that laughter is the best therapy, it really, really is. And when we fake laughing and smiling in ways where we actually throw our whole self into it. So there's a difference, just to clarify. If we're feeling bad, the best thing we can actually do is fake laughter. But that's not about smiling, with the dead eyes and going, oh, ha, 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 ha. Right? That's not doing it. It has to be. Where you're bending over, holding your belly, throwing your head back, all of those kind of things, right? You're throwing your body into it because the movement combined with the fake laughing and the fake smiling um, actually has the consequence of releasing these endorphins. It actually physically pushes the body into increasing the endorphins and doing the mood adjustments that we need. But Amanda Gore does a wonderful speech on it, so I recommend that you watch that. I must admit, I didn't believe it until I tried it. And I'm not sure if the reason it shakes you out of a mood is, I'm being sarcastic here in case you didn't pick up. Of course, there's research evidence to support it, but I can also tell you that when you're actually doing it, I actually ended up legitimately going into full blown laughter because I felt like an idiot. And I thought, God, if anybody could see me doing this, they'd think I was completely insane. Anyway, I'm going to leave these thoughts with you. Hopefully, I'll catch you on part four, which is basically the crisis response when things get way too high and you're struggling to access services. It's kind of like the information that I'll be giving you is what you can draw upon as strategy while you're waiting to get in with professional support or to access the supports that you need. But anyway, for right now, thank you very much. Been a pleasure. So glad you stuck with me. I'll see you on part four. Take care. Bye bye.